We're continuing with the book of Proverbs today, and we're going to look at Proverbs 11 through to 15. Again, these are really dense with interesting stuff that's quite practical and useful today. Albeit we do start Proverb number 11 with the Lord detests dishonest scales. But it does go on to say, but accurate weights find favour with him. So, I mean, of its time perhaps. But again, weights and measures are still important today, isn't it? But clearly that would seem to be alluding to God disliking cheating, which makes some sense. We have the general sense of pride equals bad, humility equals wisdom. Again, we still got this problem with the word pride. It just doesn't quite drill in enough, does it? So I think hubris, bad, sure. Pride. My daughter did something very cute and sweet and kind on Saturday. I was very proud of her for that. And that, as I understand it, is okay. It's that sort of hubris of I know best kind of thing, I think. But yes, it seems like a bit of a failing that that's not made clearer. We have the unfaithful are trapped by evil desires. I really like that. I mean, that's sort of obviously the case. It's a bit metaphorical, metaphysical. It's a bit abstract. Let's go with that. Like I went to Las Vegas a few years ago now. Wonderful place, loved it, but I never want to go back again. It's it's a playground for adults and not a particularly healthy one, I guess, also in that respect. So I sort of recognise that there's fun to be had there, but it's probably not an ideal sort of thing. So you can see it, if you did let that go down a slippery slope, you could be trapped by those sort of desires, I think. Something like that. Maybe it's a bad example, but that's the idea. We then have, when the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Again, there's a lot of this lately, of this whole idea of, that's pretty contradictory to the idea of love your neighbour as yourself, isn't it? And that seemed pretty clear, and that's being repeated as well. So we know that's definitely a thing. That wasn't just Moses making up some funny old stuff. And I guess C.S. Lewis helped us figure out that, okay, so loving your neighbour doesn't actually mean you have to want to do stuff with them or look after them particularly. It just means wishing them well, wishing the best for them. But shouting for joy as they perish, that wouldn't seem to qualify, but no one seems to mind that they just blatantly shout about all this stuff. We then have the wicked will not go unpunished, but those who are righteous will go free. I suppose that's an interesting key point on why some of this stuff might matter. So there's an interesting question, isn't there? If you just behave yourself and you're a decent person, is that enough? But the idea of if you're wicked, there's a big problem. If you're righteous, go free. But you need to have something to define what is it to be wicked and what is it to be righteous, surely. And we're not particularly clear on that so far, I don't think. Well, at least I'm certainly not. We've had a list of what things are wicked, but sin in general does seem to be more about aim, because David, a righteous man, or whatever word we're talking about, not a wicked man anyway, despite the fact he did some really terrible things. So it is very interesting in that respect, and alludes to the thing of why this might be an important question. We then have a talk about those who trust in their riches will fall. That's a difficult one, isn't it? Because actually, in my line of work, you meet a lot of grown-ups who haven't sorted themselves out financially and they're in a big old mess, even if they're in middle age, and you just think, okay, well, that needed doing, because life is pretty hostile anyway, and if you haven't got enough money, it's not necessarily being rich, but just having sufficient money, you're going to be in trouble. So those riches are useful to protect and provide for one's family. That is a really tricky one, where what might be right spiritually is not necessarily right for actual real life. My father, for example, arguably among his shortcomings, not the best job done of providing for his family financially. If he was right in his vicerness, that didn't really matter, then perhaps it doesn't matter. I think people would have a hard time agreeing with that. But if he was wrong, then that was a terrible way to go about. You needed to make sure everybody's okay. I mean, everybody is okay, but it was by no means assured for a while there. So, yeah, I don't know. That really grates on real life versus spiritual life. I mean, maybe that spiritual life is real life as well, but you know what I mean. Tricky. We then have a slightly odd bit, very abstract, talk about the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, not the tree of life that was in the Garden of Eden that I completely failed to pull out in the Adam and Eve video, that they just ignored it, which is a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, if I was in the Garden of Eden, you think tree of life? That sounds pretty cool too. Yeah, it's saying it's a tree of life. So, yeah, I guess a tree of life is not a tree. Yeah. What we're supposed to do about that, I'm not quite sure. Proverb 12 then goes on to talk about whoever hates correction is stupid. I mean, it's sort of obviously true again and applicable these days, isn't it? It ties in nicely with that idea that humility equals wisdom, because it's very difficult to hear correction, isn't it? I find it difficult anyway. And you need some humility in order to do that, in order to grow. So to hate correction, as it were, assuming it's constructive correction, would indeed seem to be stupid. Another quote is the kindest words. What on earth does that say? The kindest works of the wicked are cruel. That's tricky. I mean, that alludes to this. What is wickedness? I mean, I'm going to pick on Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. In biblical terms, do they not count as wicked? Particularly as they made a big effort to steer people away from God. So it wouldn't be that difficult to frame that as wickedness. But this is talking about the kindest works of these wicked people are still cruel. So I'm sure Richard Dawkins, I can't keep going backwards, has done something kind at some point. I'm sure he's not a terrible human being in secular terms. But so if he's done something kind, how is that then cruel? Well, actually, I suppose in their case, it gives prominence to the idea that they are atheists and they're preaching against the existence of God, which is turning people away from God. And if God exists, then that is one of the worst things you could do to someone, maybe. So maybe that's a terrible example. Perhaps a better example is if I use myself, in that I would presumably fall into the category of wicked because I'm not a Christian. Does that make me wicked? Maybe not. But it's certainly fair to say that I have, at least historically, held higher values than getting to know God, for example. So surely I am therefore wicked. But I've done, I don't know, 3 or 4 kind things today. And those acts were not surely things that could be categorised as wicked or cruel. Sorry, it's cruel, isn't it? That seems to pick on a very narrow definition of like a Bond villain type wicked. I don't know. Whereas in real life, not quite the same. Interesting though. The next one, unfortunately, rings quite true for me as well. But fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. Yeah, I'm pretty terrible. When someone's done something or said something that's pretty moronic, I very much feel the urge to make sure they're aware of just how moronic they are. Generally don't do it, I hasten to add. But it does seem like you can have internal sin in this context of the Bible. So, yeah, perhaps I can't. Yeah, I think I'd probably fall foul of that. I am working on it. One of my New Year's resolutions this year is equanimity, which is really hard to say. And I'm working on it. Another quote, in the way of righteousness there is life, along the path is immortality. Yeah, so we've got this reference to immortality again, which a lot of people latterly in the Bible seem to be talking about or suggesting there's some sort of eternal life or life after death, despite the fact I still don't understand how or where anyone has actually said that that is the case. Fortunately, I'm not so stupid as to not wish to be corrected, so if anyone actually knows where I missed that, I'd be grateful to have that pointed out and be corrected. This talk of hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is another tree of life, a tree of life, not the tree of life. So yeah, the tree of life definitely wasn't a tree, clearly, which ties in nicely, I guess, to my feeling that the story of Adam and Eve was metaphorical, not literal anyway. I suppose it's got to depend in this context what the longing that's fulfilled is. I mean, I long for hot dogs, but yeah, I can't. My hot dog longings fulfilled is not really a tree of life, surely. Trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things. I think that says things. I like the idea that trouble pursues the sinner. I guess that idea that if you start down the wrong path, it tends to be the slippery slope, and you're going to attract more of that dodgy stuff into your world. That seems reasonable and true. The next one seems to be the origins of the term spare the rod. And it's all about sparing the rod, and someone who does that hates their child. And this idea that loving children equals discipline, that's very much something in my head. I mean, applying it is not necessarily easy. But how did Jordan Peterson put it? It was something along the lines of the enabling of dependency is not admirable mercy, which is very difficult to say. One of my bugbears, that disciplining children is so important, isn't it? You think you're being kind by mollycoddling them, and actually you're just ruining them. There's talk of prayer from the upright pleases God. I don't know what to do with prayer. It's one of the bits I'm really struggling with. It just seems silly. I can't really say much more than that. Why would he listen and change what he's doing based on you asking for stuff? And clearly that's not always what happens. So it raises the question, does he just do what happens is what's going to happen anyway? I don't know. That's one of the really big, tricky ones to deal with at some point. And last but not least, we have those who disregard discipline despise themselves, which again, I guess, is that whole love your neighbour as yourself thing, which, as we talked about previously, my feeling was that alludes to a double imperative. So love your neighbour as yourself. So, do most people love themselves? So if most people treated their neighbours as they treat themselves, that probably wouldn't be a good thing. So you've got to instill that love of yourself. For example, I mentioned I love hot dogs. But if I gave myself hot dogs every night out of some sort of kindness for myself, it would be a terrible idea. So I have to have the discipline not to eat hot dogs for dinner every night because I'm a grown-up and I can actually do that technically if I want to. So all a bit tricky and interesting. I am loving Proverbs though. This is one of my favourite books of the Bible so far, I think. There's a real proper stuff you can get drilled into and is still applicable today in some sense at least. So we'll carry on and see what else we can find.